薄いのアホ。
プリズムパワーメイクアップオーカードレディー。
Welcome to Shojo and Tell, where we discuss shoujo manga and tell who's hot and who's not, talk about themes, and just generally geek out. Today, October 2nd, 2021, we'll be shoujo and telling about the series The Rose of Versailles by Riyoko Ikeda. I'm your host, Ashley McDonald, and I'm joined by the editor of the classic series, Erica Friedman. Hello, Erica.
Hello, Ashley. Thank you so much for having me today. I am so excited to talk about Rose of Versailles with everybody.
Oh my gosh, no, I'm so excited that you're here. I've been like, I need to have Erica on for like the past ever that I've been doing this podcast. And now you're finally here. Yay. But Erica, for people who are not familiar with you, who are you? What do you do?
What do? I am the Yuri master. I am a person who has been evangelizing the genre of Yuri since before we had a word for it. And it is pretty much the love of my life and my life's work. I write about it on my blog, Okazu. I do essays about it, and I'm writing a book on it right now, which is currently with the publisher and should be out next summer, called By Your Side, the first 100 years of Yuri anime and manga.
Ooh, adding to the academic text there for everybody.
Hopefully it'll be readable. I mean, that's really, to be very honest, I have sacrificed accuracy for readability. Or I should say, not accuracy, rigorousness. I have sacrificed rigorousness for readability.
Well, I think that's good. People are really going to want to read about that.
I hope so.
Yes. And then, so yeah, you were the editor for Rose of Versailles. And I feel like people are always very curious about some publishing behind the scenes. So hopefully you can, maybe we'll just start with like, what does being the editor of the series entail?
So that's very complicated. All questions involving publishing is extremely complicated because every company is different and every publisher is different and every relationship is different. From my perspective, I'm very lucky because I'm friendly with Eric Ko, the publisher of Udon Entertainment, and he is an incredibly easygoing, very wonderful man to work with. And he gave me this opportunity. And then I was able to work with two of my favorite translators in the world, Mari Morimoto, who I've been friends with for, I don't know, decades, and Jocelyn Allen, both of whom were just delightful to work with and very, very chill about changes or thoughts about things. So for me, this was the easiest job I've practically ever had in my entire life. Nice. While we were really careful, of course, making sure names and places and dates and everything were correct. If there was a discussion, Mari and I would have long, detailed email threads about what we wanted to do with the things that we wanted to make sure were right or just unique or something. And Jocelyn was very chill. I was coming in afterwards with her stuff. She'd already finished it all. And I would just go, well, how do we feel about this? And she'd be like, okay. Yeah. And they're both very, very easy people to work with. And so for me, it was a dream job on a dream book with dream people.
Yeah, I mean, that does sound like this is like really big series. Like really, we're going to get into it, but it's very hard to overstate the importance of the Rose of Versailles.
It is really incredibly hard to overstate the importance of the Rose of Versailles. It is a huge epoch-changing work. It is a genre-changing work. It's an industry-changing work. And we have finally got it, the whole thing. And it's mind-boggling. I don't think you can overstate how important it is.
No. Yeah, so I just want to clarify to everybody, this beginning section where we're going to talk about the series more particularly is spoiler-free as much as something about the French Revolution can be
also,
spoiler-free.
It's almost 50 years old, so I'm sorry. Spoilers might happen.
Spoilers might happen. But, for any, I think manga still skews fairly young and everybody. And this is the first time that we've had Rose of Versailles, this 50-year-old series in English. So for anybody who might not be as familiar with what the Rose of Versailles is about, would you like to give a quick plot synopsis?
Certainly. A quick plot synopsis of these 1,300 pages. Sure, no problem. Actually, I'm cheating. I'm going to read the back of the book.
Fine.
This is the back of the book on volume 1. Oscar François de Jarjayes is a young noblewoman raised as a son by her father. As commander of Marie Antoinette's palace guard, Oscar is brought face to face with the luxury of King Louis XVI's court at Versailles. Joined by her servant Andre, Oscar is privy to the intrigue and deceit of France's last great royal regime. So from this point, we have this young woman, Oscar François de Jarjayes. She is raised as a boy. She is made to be the captain of the new Queen's Guard, and she will be watching as the events that lead to the French Revolution unfold and watch the follow-up thereof. And as a result, we see all of it through the eyes of somebody who is intimately involved, who does not actually exist, so gives us a really unique perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, even if people are not super familiar with the Rose of Versailles, like the Rose of Versailles has been, Oscar in particular, has been mentioned in so many shoujo series going.
So many.
I believe explicitly mentioned in, you know, like Princess Jellyfish and stuff. So like
and you Shojo, which of course has a main character who literally screams Oscar-sama every 10 seconds.
Yeah, so, you know, it's just like Oscar has been around influencing everybody for these past 50 years.
Yes, exactly. And of course, as we talk about the spoilers, it is about the French Revolution. So I'm sorry, but there's no spoilers on something that happened in the 18th century. It's no more spoilery than the American Revolution. We know what happened.
Yeah, so we got a variation on one of our usual starter questions from listener at Love Stuffist on Twitter. So, like, when did you know about the Rose of Versailles before actually reading it, and what were your expectations coming into the series? I'm very curious, like, had you read it before? Is this like the first time you read it as the editor?
No, it's the first time I had read all of it, but I had read most of it previously. I have it in Japanese. I hadn't read the full story with all the side stories. But I had read the main body of the work many, many years ago. And I am not entirely sure when I encountered it originally, because I have been studying Yuri and the shoujo works associated with it for about 20 years myself, a little bit more than 20 years. So sometime probably in the late 90s was when I encountered it the first time, and I picked up a copy of the Bunkoban many years ago, and I read them all the way through, but that only got to the end of the main body of the work. So it didn't have any of the side stories. So I've been familiar with at least most of the text since the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s. But then after that, being able to sit down and read the whole thing from beginning to end, including the 10th anniversary chapters, was really kind of eye-opening.
Yeah. For me, it's like I didn't really start seriously getting into manga until the early 2000s. So this is certainly the first time I've ever read. I also haven't watched the anime. So this is
the anime then is a whole nother thing.
Whole other beast.
Yeah, I mean, and amazingly, not only do you have the manga, you have the whole anime out from Discotek.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you all, you should run out and get it immediately. There's just no question. It's remarkable. Although you should watch it first and then go get Dear Brother, because to be honest, while Rose of Versailles is a masterwork of storytelling and everything, Dear Brother is the height Dazaki got to. I mean, Ikeda and Dazaki together, Rose of Versailles is amazing as an anime, but oh my god, Dear Brother.
Okay, so we have so much homework right now.
Oh yeah, homework. You have to watch Rose of Versailles first, because it's amazing, and it's going to take you a long time, because at least for me, it's very soap opera-y, and I can only do like an episode or two a day before it just got too much. And then Dear Brother, but I'm going to tell you, like, have the tissues, have snacks, and warm blankets.
Perfect season for the warm blanket.
It is completely melodramatic. It's awesome.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, yeah. So again, this is my first time really encountering it. Like, I've been aware of Rose of Versailles, obviously, because again, Oscar has been mentioned in many a shoujo series. So I've been like, who's this person they keep referencing?
Right.
You know, I Wikipedia'd Rose of Versailles many a time.
And when we watched Rose of Versailles the last time, my wife and I just basically kept Wikipedia open, because so much of the content of Rose of Versailles is accurate to history. And it's a
Yeah.
story that's accurate except for where it isn't,
I
and
know.
it's like so much of that is so real. And it really strikes you when you get to some of the most ridiculous stuff, like the most ridiculous bits of the affair of the necklace, and you're thinking, how could
Yeah.
this even have been a thing? And then you read the article and you're like, oh, it really
Totally was a
was.
thing. I
It
know.
was really a thing. But you have to remember technology was different, and letter writing changes a lot of things because it slows everything down and obfuscates things. And it was easier to run frauds in the 18th century.
Yeah, for sure. No, I reading this, I was definitely like, man, AP Euro would have been a lot more interesting if I had been allowed to read The Rose of
Right?
Versailles when we get to the French Revolution, you know?
Yeah, right. Exactly.
That's how you get the youths to care about stuff, is like, come
Yeah,
on,
give
make
them
them read
crazy stuff.
manga.
I don't know if a mangaka I know came up with an idea as an aside in something else. She came up with the idea of teaching history to young people by making all of the early Japanese daimyo and monarchs all boy bands. And
Mm.
I thought, "Oh my god, yes, the Miyamoto boy band," and then you'd remember everybody, right? Everybody would be
Yeah.
so easy, and I thought, "My god, that's the most brilliant thing I've ever heard."
Yeah. Not only is publishing stuck very far in the past, but academia is also a bit stuck in the past, and we're like, bring manga into it, and everybody will remember stuff.
Well, and honestly, I'm gonna shout out to librarians here. They're librarians generally are very pro manga in
Yes.
schools and libraries, and teachers are really reaching out. But I want to say libraries and librarians are really making a huge difference. They're putting manga, particularly nonfiction manga, historical manga, teaching manga, all into libraries, and people are responding by taking them out and reading them. And I know the ALA has a graphic novel and comics roundtable, manga roundtable, and there's a couple lists that I'm on, but I don't really interact with because I'm not a member of the ALA. Even though I am, in fact, a librarian, I'm not an ALA librarian. So I really want to shout out to libraries for being really on the forefront of that because they are pushing that.
Yeah, because they know that it's a really good way to make children read more.
Yeah, reading is reading.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
totally. Yeah. To touch on the what were my expectations coming into the series, I mean, it's just such a big series. It's one of those things where you're like, I'm so afraid I won't like it because of all the hype, but I'm like, no, I actually really did like it.
Did you?
it
Oh,
it
good. Okay.
it
Who was
lives
your
up
favorite
to its hype.
character?
Oh, I mean, I love Oscar. I'm like, yes, give me more Oscar.
It's
For
really
sure.
possible not to like Oscar, isn't it?
No, it's not. You can't. Yeah, that's why everybody in Japan loves Oscar. Everybody in France loves Oscar. Now we finally get to love Oscar in America.
I did a video recently on YouTube and I talked very briefly about the Girl Prince, and I know that's one of the questions, so we can talk about that a little bit. But what Oscar is everything we could be, and everything. When we talk about people are the heroes of their own stories, everyone imagines themselves Oscar, somebody
Mm,
whose nobility supersedes every other possible thing,
yeah.
and most people fail to be Oscar realistically,
Yes.
but she really sets the bar very, very high for girl princes after her.
Yeah, and just like any situation that she's in, she's trying. It's very interesting because I feel like today's environment is very political environment is very like charged,
Oh, this
and
is
like we
very
all
much the same story. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. We're living through this.
Yeah, so but I feel like people would think Oscar is perhaps too moderate, although Oscar, too much spoilers, but like, whatever, but yeah, no, it's like Oscar handles every situation with poise and grace and like tries really hard to understand everybody's point of view
Uh-huh.
and then like figure out her own morality within that, regardless of her ranking or like taking into account her ranking, but trying very hard to be like, no, but what is just objectively right? And I'm like, yes, Oscar.
Yeah. Yeah, she does. She sets the bar very, very high. And she wasn't, of course, the first girl prince. The first girl prince in manga was Sapphire from Ribbon no Kishi, Princess Knight, which we also have in English right now, and it's back out in print as a digital format from Kodansha. So if you want to see kind of where, so I have this kind of theory. This is just my own personal internal joke that if Osamu Tezuka is the god of manga, then Riyoko Ikeda is the goddess of manga, and that Gonagai is the creepy uncle of manga. That's my triumvirate for
Okay, yeah.
everything. And so Ikeda Sensei does things where she's taking similar kinds of themes that Tezuka does, and she's dealing with them in an entirely her own, completely unique way, wrapped up in her, some years later. But she's looking at this stuff this idea of the girl prince and saying, well, what happens when you translate that to a not fantasy setting, a real setting in which realer, much more critical people we see are going to be affected by these choices. How do these choices affect the people around them? And I think that's, wow, like 1,500 steps up from Princess Knight. It's like Princess Knight was very much a Disney fantasy. It's like, yes, we know that it will affect real people, but there are no real people in the story. There's only, princes and princesses and, but this is like, okay, let's take this concept and go, what really, really happens? What happens when this actually interacts with things that humans do? And I think that raises the stakes. And this is why I think when you read Rose of Versailles today, it's compelling. Because first of all, we're living through the same period of time, right? The wealth, the inequality of wealth, and the injustices of the elite versus, the proletariat. I mean, it's not like this is unusual for us. I mean, like, we're literally living through it right now. Yeah. And so that's like, well, yada, there's that. And then there's this idea of like, how do we objectively think about this? And the answer is, we don't. There's no such thing as objectivity. It's not a real thing. It's a thing that people who are, I don't know, sociopaths put on human. You can't be objective about human behavior, right? So this is a story that says objectivity does not exist. What does subjectivity really mean in the context of making decisions that will affect other people? And I think this is a brilliant masterwork as a result.
Yeah, no, it like, we'll get into more of it later, but I'm just like, narratively, this is like mind-blowing to me. Just so mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing. And also artistically, can I just say this? Yeah. As I edited these books, I literally screen capped Oscar's face over and over and over, and I just kept taking little screens. I have 120 screenshots of Oscar's face on my computer because she changes. We start with her as a young kid, and we move through her and losing her idealism, but never losing her nobility, and losing her hope, and still never losing her nobility. And watching her face change was extraordinary.
Yeah, and that's another thing where it's like, wow, we actually really grow up with all of these characters. Like Marie changes. Everybody gets to change. Andre changes a lot.
Yeah, Andre changes a lot, right? Rosalie. Yeah. Rosalie is honestly one of my favorite characters. She undergoes probably the most visibly humongous change.
Yeah, and that's something that we don't get in a lot of shoujo manga, like contemporarily. It's like they're in high school, they age max 4 years,
and then sometimes we get like a little epilogue where they're like another 4 years older, like, oh, now we're in college. It's like, wow, that's like the first third of your life.
Yeah. Whereas, it's like, wow, yeah, we get to see these characters change epically, but we always feel so rooted in who they are because it's so gradual when you're reading it. It's like, oh, it's so good.
Yeah, it really is. Honestly, reading it all the way through, every page, I was like, wow, wow. I'm just so blown away. I've got them all sitting here so I can just admire them. Also, Andy Chang's cover art. My God, that cover design.
Yeah, they're so pretty. I think somebody did tweet at us in Spanish, and I was trying to figure out the context, but I think they tweeted being like angry that the Spanish covers are so ugly, but ours are so pretty in English.
Oh, that's something they have to take up with that publisher, really. Honestly, yeah, Udon really killed it with the covers. I'm every time I look at them, I can't stop looking at them. There's so much there.
So pretty, yeah. So everybody, if you haven't read The Rose of Versailles yet, you should definitely try to do that in the gorgeous omnibus editions from Udon in North America. It is a physical release only, and they can be, I will not lie, they're a bit pricey, but they're worth it.
But they're worth it, right? I was joking with Eric one day because as soon as we got my first copy, my wife took a look at it, didn't even correct it over. She said, "Why aren't the pages gilded?" And I said, "Because you know why they aren't gilded, right?" But honestly, we actually considered about buying an extra copy and trying to gild them ourselves because they really should have gilt edges.
Yeah, it's that kind of book.
It's that kind of book, right? I mean, so I was saying to Eric, we should do like a 50th anniversary release, like subscription only with gilt edges for, what's it going to be like $55, $60 a volume. But still,
Yeah, only for the serious collectors out there.
Right, but it would be hella gorgeous,
Yeah. I mean, it's like, why don't publishers just put out 3 different versions of everything? The cheap one, the medium one, and then like the collectors.
Right. Why don't we just do that in a world where we have unprecedented supply line issues?
Yes. Why don't we just do that in the middle of the coronavirus?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
All right, so we're gonna get into all these questions now, and now we're definitely gonna spoil all the things.
Sorry, guys. There's practically no way to talk about a 50-year-old series about 300-year-old events.
Yeah.
Without some spoilage.
Spoilers. Everybody dies.
That is actually true.
It's super true.
That is actually true. I love that about it. I have to say before we do the spoilers. So a couple of years ago, I was in Japan, and there was a pop-up shop in Tokyo Station on Character Street. So there's this little pop-up shop, and they're selling boxes of Rose of Versailles tissues, and all it was people, all the characters crying. And I wanted them so badly. I took like 500 pictures, but oh my God, that made me laugh every time I think about it because everybody cries.
Everybody cries.
Constantly.
They're all dead.
And they're all dead at the end.
That's the Rose of Versailles. Yeah. Yes. Well. All right. So let's see if we can answer some of these questions from people. So at Midnight Library on Twitter asked, what were some of the major challenges about localizing this series?
Okay, so that's a really great question. So let me just go back to, I actually got into this series because Morimoto, who is the first of 2 translators on this series, was working on the last volume. And she asked me for some help as an editor. And then when Eric said, well, he was looking for an editor, I was already working with Mari, so I ended up getting sort of sucked into the story backwards. So Mari and I talked a lot about one of the key problems, and I talk about this in workshops even, is not the names that exist. I mean, we know how to spell Marie Antoinette.
Yes.
How do you localize Girardel or Madame Hebara? How do you find a way that makes sense for the names that don't exist? And how do we do things like the money? So the money in this manga is francs, which no longer exist, in 18th century francs, translated into 1970 yen. And we need to make it make sense. Right. Make sense in 2021 dollars. So that kind of thing takes a little bit more time than you'd actually think it might. Like you just read that note and you go, okay, whatever, it was 6 million, whatever. How do you do that? I mean, it doesn't matter. You just know it was a lot. It doesn't matter how many livre or franc it is. You just know, okay, it's a lot. But to take time, Mari had to take a lot of time and actually kind of think about that. Or things like stupid stuff like a character's rank. So the way Ikeda Sensei writes the ranks is in Japanese terms. So hakushaku and ko and those kinds of things. And we have to think, are they really a marquise or a marquis? Are they, is it a commodore or a captain? Because she doesn't make any distinction between them. They're both kaicho. And she has different rankings. So at one point there was I don't know, in the last one, there was somebody who was called something. She's a captain. And I'm like, it was, I don't know. It was something that didn't exist in the Navy. And I'm like, it would be Commodore. I think, or commander. I think it was commander. Anyway, so there was like this weird ranking thing, and I actually had to sit and pore over 18th century military ranks. And it's not a big thing, and probably nobody's going to ever notice it or care, but it's the kind of thing you spend time on.
Yeah.
Here's a good question for you to all answer. This is your homework. What drug was it that Madame Hibera was actually pushing?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I had assumed opium, but
the
it doesn't make sense.
symptoms were more like heroin.
Yeah.
So I guessed laudanum.
Okay.
But
we'll never know. It's not.
We're never going to know, right? So,
yeah.
but I'm pouring over, like, when was cocaine introduced? That cocaine actually came to France.
You know a lot about drugs now, is what I'm learning.
Yeah, no, really, cocaine actually came a little bit afterwards.
Oh.
So it was like a 20-year. So maybe she was thinking cocaine. I don't know. But the bottom line is, we literally sat and poured over this stuff. So there are challenges, but they're really small and tiny, and they only make a difference to the one person to whom they make a difference. So if you have one person who's reading it and goes, oh, that's not right, that can't be the right thing, that's the person who gets all bent out of shape because of whatever.
And they tweet about it and it gets like 1,000 retweets. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a couple of things here that people didn't like, and I liked a lot. So one of the biggest complaints people have about is Rosalie's verbal tic, where she says, I'm moi all the time. And I love that. I love that. And here's why I didn't say, let's take it out, because she is a young woman who's growing up in slums, but she's being told constantly by her mother that she does not belong in the slums, that she's actually the daughter of a nobility. So she's putting on airs and also trying to be, fancier, and then she gets to Versailles and she is completely out of her element. And so her tic, her airs become a verbal tic, and she can't stop herself. But here's the thing. If you look at the later chapters, it's gone. Why? Because she lived through the revolution. Yeah. She matures. She figures out who she actually is. And by the end, it's gone. She's grown out of it. But I think it's an awesome tick to remind you that she does not belong in any of these places. And it's a nervous habit.
Yeah. No, definitely my partner's biggest complaint reading it. He's just like, this is just so annoying. And I was like, but clearly it's important. They like, Oscar directly references it at one point, being like, you need to stop, and she's like, I can't.
Exactly. And people don't like it, but that's the point.
Yeah.
That when you meet somebody who's putting on airs, it always seems very irritating, but she's very young and she's been told that she should not be here. And this is her way of holding on. It's her fantasy in her head. And when she gets to Versailles, she's out of place beyond anything she's ever imagined. I mean, fancy to a person who has bread soup is going to be a different fancy to people who eat, 3-week-old quail eggs, every other day. It's like, it's such a different level of existence that so of course the tic becomes codified and it makes her look even worse. But yeah, she does grow out of it. And I think it was really good. But that kind of stuff that was a genuine editorial choice, Mari. I had a long talk about it. Why would we keep that? And then when we decided that we'd make sure it wasn't there in the final chapters, I went back and I wrote everybody and said, here's the story that we're going with. So we all knew why at the end she doesn't have it anymore.
My question about it had been that in Japanese, did she say watashi moi? Because that's like...
No, she doesn't. She just says watashi.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah, she just does that. That was something that Mari decided would give her a sense of being out of place.
Because watashi moi is very cute sounding.
It actually does sound kind of cute. And I did also go back and check that, but no, she does not. But I liked it. And I know people were like, Erica, what's with that? And I'm like, do you not know anybody with a verbal tic? Like, do you not know anybody who says like every sentence?
Yeah. No, I think it was good. Yeah. In the end, it's hard to read, but again, that is the point.
It is the point. It's meant to make her sound awkward. Yeah. And then when you get, when you finally find out about her and Jean and Jean's relationship to her, and then she's so different. Like, she's so different.
Oh, Jean.
I love her. I love her so much.
Oh my goodness. My partner was definitely like read the beginning of it and he was like, okay, I'm definitely rooting for John. And then I had read further along and I was like, really? You're rooting for John?
No, but you know what? I could totally understand that because we like villains and she's a villainess, man.
Oh, she's
You know,
hardcore.
right to the very end, she has no hex to give.
No, I love when she's she does the whole necklace thing, but then it's like, oh, but then in the end she also writes all these memoirs that are full of
It was
lies.
like volumes and volumes, and that was the thing when I was reading it, the history of it. She wrote like volumes and volumes. She just kept putting them out, and they were getting like worse and more explicit, more it was really funny. I mean, she's just squeezing every penny out of this.
Yeah, and it works. That's the
Works.
best part.
Yeah, it works totally because it would, right?
Yeah.
It would. If you can think of any situation that's similar where somebody is, writing a tell-all book about what goes on behind scenes. I believe there's one of those that just came out last week about the previous administration. And it was almost
Yes.
exactly the same thing. And it's like, it's pretending to be a principled stance, but it's not. It's just making money off of, stuff they did nothing about at the time.
Yeah, and they're like, look at how crazy this story is. It's like, yeah, it affected millions of people. You should have thought about that.
Exactly. Worldwide, people were affected by it while you stood there and thought, this will make a great book.
This will make a really great book that, some publisher will buy for millions of dollars and then I'll get all the royalties.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly it. So that's what Jean was. And there you go.
Awesome. Good job, John. Work the system to you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just looking over the other questions.
Okay.
They're all kind of similar. Like I put these all in the similar vein. So sorry if we skipped your question, but there's only so many translation things we can talk about. Neolicious on Twitter asked if since you have a long history with Yuri manga, what did it feel like working on such an iconic work, and how did you and translators deal with its age, like given its age and impact? Like I think you touched on that a bit, but I'm curious in terms of the history of Yuri manga and shoujo manga. Like my understanding of it is, those things didn't used to be different, right? like Yuri and shoujo were all kind of mixed in there together. But now more contemporarily they're more distinct, not genres but designations of manga.
Right. So I guess my perspective of that, it'll be twofold. Let me just answer the easy one, which is when I found out that I was working on it, even in a little bit, because like I said, I started with helping out Mari, and then I ended up doing some technical background stuff, like literally working on Excel spreadsheets in the way editorial assistants do. And then I ended up being able to actually edit it. When I found out that I was actually working on it at all, I think I ran a few laps around the house screaming.
Yeah,
I think that was how a very, very adult response. Oh my god! Oh my
I
god!
think
Oh
it's
my
appropriate.
god! Something incredible, something incredibly staid.
Yeah, I think that's a very appropriate response.
Thank you very much. I believe arms were wagging around like in a Kermit style, and perhaps some screaming occurred. So that was how I handled that. Like when I was getting the opportunity to do that. But as for Yuri and Shoujo, so here's what I consider to be a short version of Yuri, because Yuri has the most complex history of all the current genres. So it did start on its own as a feature of every individual demographic genre. There was Yuri in, or what we now call
Right.
Yuri in, shonen and seinen and shoujo and josei. So they were
Mm.
all separate. What we think of all the classic stuff from the 70s, like Shoroyuhei no Futari and Rose of Versailles, those are all an outshoot of the shoujo and josei from the Magnificent 49ers. So
Right.
it all was of a time where you had sexual and gender exploration within shoujo and josei manga in a way that was different than it was in seinen and shoujo and shonen, but not entirely separate and apart, because everybody was doing all sorts of exploration in the late 60s and 70s of material, because all these people had grown up reading manga and they wanted to now explore it out, which makes perfect sense. And there was also even real more explorative work like in Garo and that kind of thing. So alternative manga. So none of that is surprising. And it's also not surprising that there is a girl prince because again, there's Sapphire who sits there atop, the Snow White turned prince category. So this is Ikeda Sensei looking at these things, and she explores gender and sexuality in other stories as well. This is not the only one that she does. It was very much of its time. You had in the early 70s, you had Kazutoki no Uta. I always get that one wrong. Kazutoki no Uta, Song of the Wind in the Trees. You get Heart of Thomas, which is out in English. So you have these stories where these young women are looking into these ideas of gender and sexuality and personhood and history. And it makes sense that these things are also in faraway places and exotic so that they're not here and not making anybody uncomfortable as like, oh, the kid next to you is. So all that sort of, I think, it kind of makes sense in and of its time. What happened with Yuri is that as children of the 70s grew up reading those things, when they became adults in the 90s, they wanted stuff that was exploring that more. And this is the way it works, right? Every generation takes what they were given in the last generation and they explore it out. What are the extremes? What are the outer limits of what we already know to be? And of course, technology and society change. So as we're more comfortable with XYZ, it's like, okay, well, let's go look at JKL. Let's see what happens when we move out here, or what happens when we do this. So this is not unusual. This is just the way things like science fiction works and literature works. So when you're looking at the late 90s, you're looking at people who grew up with this kind of thing going, you know what, we need more of that.
Yeah.
So in the late 90s, you get something like Sailor Moon. And Sailor Moon gives us Haruka Michiru, and there's Naoko Takeuchi doing something one step further out, taking the concepts of that princely girl and this kind of also that had grown up in the early 80s, this concept of the host girl, like this girl who's just, always in the suit and she's very cool. And very charming, almost like a host at a host club. So that character becomes Haruka. And then of course there's Takarazuka, which we haven't talked about yet, but we will clearly have to talk about at some point today. Takarazuka gives us this idea of this very masculine woman who is a better man than the men around her, kind of thing. And so then we have Haruka Michiru, and then that grows into a whole fandom. The people who grew up reading that, they become people who go, why don't we have just gay characters? Why don't we have characters who are just cross-dressers or trans characters or whatever?
Yeah.
Non-binary, gender fluid, gender queer. Why don't we just have these characters? Why are our characters just, they're like a Takarazuka couple when you actually mean it's a butch lesbian who's gender fluid and her lover? Like when we look back now at them, we go, oh, okay. That's obviously what we're seeing, but at the time, Takarazuka couple, So every generation takes what they were given and goes, yeah, but. And that's why sometimes, as I'm reading Yuri manga in the 90s and I'm seeing all these connections backwards and going, hey, is anyone writing about this for an English language audience? Does anybody understand that when we look at 1999, 2000 Utena, how do you watch Revolutionary Girl Utena and not look at the whole story and go, there's so much Ikeda sensei, Riyoko Ikeda here. How do you not look at that and go, Juri is Miya-sama from Onisama clearly, and how do you not see that Utena is not a new interpretation of what Oscar stood for? This concept of her whole story about, she's going to be a prince. Like, it's a fairy tale, but it's a fairy tale that has roots in earlier Ikeda Sensei's work, So I'm looking at this stuff going, there's all this tradition that the Western audience just didn't have.
Yeah. And
so I started writing about it. And the day it changed was I had done a lecture up at MIT, and I met Sarah Frederick, Dr. Sarah Frederick. She's really fantastic, and she has done the only translation of Yoshinobuko's work we have so far, which is Yellow Rose, and it's available digitally from extended editions. And it's one of the Hana Monogatari, one of Yoshinobuko's Flower Tales, which was generation defining in the 1920s in Japan. And as she and I were talking, I had said that I had read the movie manga for Utena. And in that manga, there's a scene where Ashi turns to Utena and says, "Come with me to the outside world." And I thought, oh my God, this is the same ending as what I consider to be the first Yuri novel, which is Yana Ura no Ni Shoujo by Yoshinobuko. And I went, wait a second. You mean that they knew all along that there was like, and then it dawned on me, it was like the scales fell from my eyes, and I realized that Utena was filled with massive amounts of references to things that even I didn't know. And so I started studying backwards. And that was kind of how that happened. And then as we're all moving forward and going, well, yeah, you think that this character comes from here, but actually this character comes from here. And then you get series like, not just Kakeki Shoujo, but you get series like Review Starlight, which so clearly has references to Takarazuka and other musical review troops, but also there's whole scenes that you honestly might think Ikuhara Kunihiko did. Like the whole concept of the giraffe seems so really surreal until you realize that he's just an adult male stand-in, and if you had a guy in that scene, it would be gross and creepy. So they put a giraffe there, and then it's wow, look, it's surreal. So all of this interconnects because the people who create it all know the stories.
Yeah.
You know. So when we look at what we think of now as Yuri, it's because those of us who have talked about Yuri and written about Yuri, and those of us who create Yuri know those connections. And so what happened was in the 2000s, 2010s, we started going, hey, this is kind of its own thing.
Its own thing, yeah. And
deserves its own word and deserves its own section of the shelves.
Yeah, and that's where we are
and that's
now.
Where we are just starting in the late 2010s, yes.
Yeah. No, yeah, talking that much about Utena, I've definitely started to think like Utena was very like I only watched it fairly recently timeline wise, like 2015 or something, 2016, but it was very formative for me, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. Yeah, there's all this history, you know, like Utena's already been so iconic to people who have seen it in the West, and it's just like, are we unlocking a whole new level by getting Rose of Versailles? Now I'm like, oh my
exactly,
gosh.
you are. It's a secret level that's underneath Utena. Yeah.
I know. So I'm like, oh, this is all hidden. I feel like in America we're going backwards. We keep being like, wait a minute, yeah, let's keep going. Publishing older titles.
Exactly that. We're going backwards because that stuff was stuff we never got. So we're still we now are back into the middle part of the century, and there's still some things that I think we haven't gotten, but we haven't quite gotten back to the beginning of the century, which is in 2019 I celebrated the 100 years of Yuri, dating it from Yana Ura no Ni Shoujo, the serialization, and then moving forward. So we still have a few things that haven't been unlocked, but yes. These are some massively formative things that the reason we have Yuri now is because in 1974 we had Oscar.
Thanks, Oscar.
Yay.
Yay. Oscar brought us everything we love.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there were other things too, of course. There's Yamagishi Ryoko's Shurahei no Futari, which we also don't have. But realistically, it's very old-fashioned. And if we got it now, would it sell really well? Probably not, although I would buy all the copies because I want it so badly.
You're like, I'll buy 5 copies just to make up for
I love when people tell you that. They're like, well, if anyone else says, I'll buy it. I'm like, great, get 5,000 of your closest friends to also say they'll buy it, and then we're good,
I know everybody's like, I don't understand why you take away these features when I personally would use it. And it's like, well, I mean, you're one person.
Yes, exactly.
There's only so many resources. Okay. So at Ramayasha on Twitter, who is one of the hosts of the Manga Mavericks podcast,
asked, friend of mine. Lum is awesome.
Lum is awesome. Do you have any particular resources that helped you the most doing research for the
Oh,
translation?
yes. Yes.
You're like, I'll lay it down. If you want to learn about drugs, here you
First of all, thank you to Eric Ko of Udon for having given me the Kanzenban, because that was very helpful that I could sit down and actually hold the Kanzenban, all of the Kanzenban, the Japanese perfect volumes, so that I could actually hold them in my hands. And also, he sent me, I'm going to read you a couple of things here. I have the Musée de Versailles, which is a book, an art book, a collected art book of a lot of the images and the covers, and which. So if you look at any given volume, you'll see a lot of the color art, and it will say what magazine. So it will say, like, here's an issue of Oscar with a rose in her mouth pulling her sword from volume. I just picked up volume 2, and it says 1973 Weekly Margaret Magazine, issue 6 cover art. So I ended up, that was originally how I started working on this, was for Eric, was getting every single image and saying, this is where it ran, by
So
matching it
citing
to the cover. And this is the only edition, by the way, that has all of the art in the order in which it ran. So the color pages are all attached specifically to the issue that it ran, that particular Margaret magazine, or
right.
that particular extra, or that particular whatever,
Like
So
in other editions, they just put it like at the end or something.
yeah, they'd put them either at the end or the beginning. They'd have a gallery of some kind, or they do one or two, and the rest of them are in black and white. But this has all of them in the order. So if you have a color page or color pages at the beginning of a chapter, that was how it ran in the magazine, which is really awesome. I also was really lucky to find a couple of the actual magazines in Mandarake and Nakano. In 2019, I was there, and I found like 3 issues of the original Margaret magazine in which it ran. So I kept the issue for myself where she throws herself at the cannons of the Bastille. So I have that for myself, and I gave Eric and Mario a copy of the others. So that's kind of helpful. But the La Musée de Versailles and a couple other books that I have here were very helpful. And Wikipedia. I ended up spending a lot of time, and
Should go down some rabbit holes. Yeah.
yeah, let me just talk about how to use Wikipedia. People say, well, they tell me you can't use it for school. Well, you can't, but you
Right.
can. I'm a librarian. This is how we research things. As a librarian, it's called pearl culturing. You can go to an encyclopedia, like Wikipedia, which is an encyclopedia, and see a fact, and then go down to the notes. Don't just copy that note. Go to the note, go read that article, go check that fact, and make sure, because Wikipedia editors are just editors. We're all human and fallible, and Wikipedia is crowdsourced, so lots of things sort of fall through cracks. That's why sometimes you're reading a Wikipedia article, it reads like there's no verb noun matching,
Yeah.
and like it sounds like 15 people wrote it, because actually 15 people wrote it. So
Yeah.
some of the paragraphs don't even make sense. But if you go into a encyclopedic source, and then you track down where those things came from, and you make sure those things are actually saying what they say they're saying, which they often do not.
Oh, that's the hint there. Yeah.
Yeah, because you'll see people will say, like, so and so said in his article, and when you finally track that article, actually no, they didn't say that at all. And even worse, sometimes they cite that from somewhere else. When you track that down, that person didn't. But that's how you do research with Wikipedia. So when I say I cracked open Wikipedia, I don't mean I read an article and went, woohoo. I went and checked the notes, checked the sources. And of course I have the Japanese copy with me, which helps a lot for just, okay, what is this actually saying? And I don't second guess the translators, but if something doesn't sound right, or there's something that's clearly missing, I'll touch base with them and say, what do we think about this?
That makes sense. So, did you learn anything new about the French Revolution or French history while working on the manga?
Yeah, actually, I did. France is not an area of expertise I have at all. So I really didn't know anything about the Ancien regime. I didn't really understand what part specifically Marie, what her spending, what parts her spending. I always
Mm,
thought she was a little just scapegoated, and maybe she
right.
has been a little bit, but it does sound like she was pretty spendthrift. Um, I didn't really understand anything about Ferguson, and I have to mention that just this week, letters between Marie and Ferguson have been, the redactions in those letters have been broken. So,
Yeah.
right, that was really great news that came out this week. So
Yeah.
apparently Marie wrote these letters to Ferguson and he redacted them. He crossed words out and sections out, which I think most people assume he did because he wanted to protect her reputation.
Right.
So if you're out there and you're interested, go look up redaction Marie Antoinette's letters, and you'll find the news. It's out of France right now, and it's pretty awesome actually. I mean, it's kind of cool that those letters actually existed. And now, having read some of those passages, I realize that some of it is actually quoted in here, which is kind of cool. And I knew nothing about Sweden after the post-revolution. I'm really weak on post-French Revolution in Europe. So the end chapter is about Fersen and his existence going back to Sweden. All of that, I knew none of that. That was all brand new. And I had to read and learn all about all of that, which was kind of fascinating. It really strikes home just how much of a world changing shift the revolution was. You know, that
Yeah.
whole Europe it's sort of the endfall of the Roman Empire level,
Yeah.
you know, where all these up to this point just presumed godly empires just fell because the people were like, no, no,
No.
absolutely not.
Yeah. I yeah, well, when you mentioned Fersen, yeah, my partner and I the other day, my partner was like, "I thought Fersen was, like, hanged," and I was like, "Oh, the end of the manga makes it
Nope.
seem like he was lynch mob,"
He
like,
was beaten to death by a
he was
mob.
put to death by a mob, and then we went in the Wikipedia hole and, yeah, like, saw that, and
Uh,
he was like, "Okay." So, I think it's very you're getting asked all these questions about, like, what research did you do for the translation, but I'm like, Riyoko Ikeda did so much research to make sure that this manga where one of the main characters is totally made up was so historically accurate at a
right?
time where we didn't have Wikipedia, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, it's
Yeah.
wild."
It is wild, and when you start realizing, like, the bits of the army, we get, like, teeny pieces about the French Guard versus the Royal Guard and all that kind of stuff. Man, that's, like, the whole thing. There's
I know.
there's a lot there, you know? And so, when you start realizing what the reputation of the French Guard was, and then the look on everybody's face when Oscar says, "I would like to be demoted into the French Guard," and they're all like, it's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, okay, yeah," and now it makes a lot more sense, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, we spent a lot of time, looking up stuff and just following those rabbit holes, but also making sure that the things were correct. And as I said, then there was stuff like Hebara and what was going on in Paris at that time in terms of like drug use and medical sales, like medical abilities and stuff like what was actually the background around that. And Hebera might have very well been a real story. Also, Elizabeth Bathory. There's a story later on that is probably based on the story of Elizabeth Bathory, who bathed in supposedly virgin women's blood. There's just a lot of stuff where she was going and looking at broadsheets of the time. I mean, you're not going to find stories about, I don't want to spoil anything, but like that fifth volume goes really crazy.
Oh, yeah, it does.
There's
No,
a lot of
that's
cool stuff going on there, and not all of it is entirely made up.
I know. At the end of the Hibara story, I actually expected some type of note that was going to be like, this was based on some other incident. Since we had
Yeah.
gotten that in earlier story, I was like, oh,
Well,
okay,
and
I didn't get
it
that note.
was based on some of the drug use, but not, obviously Hebera herself was not, but yeah, there were stories of people selling stuff to the nobility, and addicting them, which is not entirely surprising. There's also there's the one thing that nobody has ever asked about, but there's a really, really cool shout out to another Magnificent 49er at the end of volume 5. which I
Really?
loved. I mean, I'd forgotten when I had read that, and I'm like, oh, that's right, I forgot that. That's so great. So I think that's a particularly wonderful moment as well.
Oh, you have, well, we have a question about the side stories. I think you definitely have fonder memories of them than I do. But
Oh, okay.
that's
I love Lulu. I know there was a question there about what do I think of the Lulu stories.
yeah. Well, we
Um,
could just answer it now, yeah. So, what do
okay.
you think of the Lulu stories?
What do I think of the Lulu stories? So I think when you start initially reading the Lulu stories, they seem really stupid, right? Like they're just like, woo, but they're not. And I gotta tell you something. The longer I spent my time with Lulu, the more amazing she became. And
Really?
so I would say by the end, I mean, okay, this is going to be my one big spoiler. I'm sorry, this is a spoiler. If you do not want spoilers, boop, until my next boop.
You're allowed to spoil things.
Okay. There's a moment when Alan shows up and Lulu looks at him and says, "I've been waiting for you." I like just my jaw dropped. I mean, that moment is profound.
Mm,
And I thought, the thing that this story did just now is it showed you something really important. We saw Oscar in a vacuum. We know that she had a bunch of
right.
sisters and that she had a father who'd gotten very high in the ranks. And we know that she was herself obviously a genius in terms of like emotional quotient. You know, she handled people beautifully
Mm,
and she wasn't stupid or anything. And she was well educated. But what about the rest of the family? So we see Hortense once or twice, and she just seems like, nice lady. She seems super nice. And
yeah.
then we meet Lulu, and we realize that Oscar is not in a vacuum. Lulu is as much a de Jarjayes as she is, a Laurency, and that Lulu is very much, Oscar and Lulu are not that different. And had Lulu been a boy, she probably could have ended up running, a whole section of government on her own.
Mm,
And I thought it was a very profound moment at that moment when Ellen rides up and Lulu, who had arranged everything by doing nothing, like she just knew what was going on and she knew it all. She knew all the pieces would fall into place and she saw it all, laid out in front of her and knew how it was going to work at what 6, 8, and everybody going, oh, you're so silly, and thinking, holy crap, this kid could rule the world if she was allowed to, but will she?
yeah. I mean,
And
she's very
so,
cunning.
yeah, and I thought that was, the more I spent time with Lulu, the more I thought these stories were extremely profound. Yes, they're presented as very goofy, and I particularly like Lulu and Andre, constantly sniping at each
Oh, yeah,
other.
yeah. They're fun.
But the key here for me was how Oscar dealt with Lulu. Because at the beginning, of course, Oscar is like, "Whoa, my niece, what do I do?" And
Yeah.
by like the second story, she's like, "Shut up and do whatever she says." I
She's both,
thought,
like, exasperated, but also like, "Oh, yeah, Lulu actually knows what's up. We should trust her," you know?
yeah, I mean, when she says, "Shut up and do whatever she says," I was like, "Yes, okay, this is not the story you think it is."
Yeah.
It was. I thought they were actually kind of profound by the end there. Also, they
Hmm.
give you a hint of the lingering effects of the revolution. Like the Lawrencees having to get out by doing what they had to do, and Rosalie having to get out by trusting with people that she should not have to trust.
Yeah. That makes sense, that makes sense.
I mean, when
Yeah.
you think when Rosalie comes to Sweden, how little Fersen wants to have anything to do with her at all.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
Yeah.
and Sophie doesn't look all that particularly happy about it either. But but they are bound by their love of Oscar to help her, so they do. And I thought honestly one of the most touching moments of the entire series is the end of Rosalie's story when there's a line that says, and thus with this is the passing of the last person who appeared in the Rose of Versailles, like the last main character. And I'm like, wow, that's really done over dead. you
Yeah,
know,
yeah, dead,
that's
she had to die.
yeah, I'm sad. I'm sad. I cried at the end of when Rosalie passed.
Oh, yeah.
She's a great character.
I just wanted to read the actual question since, I think it gives tone wise, it was from @brainchild129 on Twitter, who heads the Manga Test Drive review site, and has been on it for a couple of episodes of this podcast in the past. So it was, what is your stance on the Lulu stories? Whimsical postscript to the series, nonsensical waste of time, or something in between? But you seem like way more effusively positive about them than any of those questions.
Yeah, I feel like they start off as a whimsical side story and become something much, much, much more profound. I do. I really, my first encounter with them was like, really? Okay.
What I'm
And
learning is,
then
go
as
reread
they
them.
went on, I'm like, all right, there's some, and they also give a really interesting view of the kinds of horrors that lay for real under French society, because we hardly touch on them. Of course, there's a lot of poverty, there's starvation, there's the way the nobles treat the people as just disposable objects. There's that. We have the story of Ellen's sister Diane, who has a horrible death, but we also get things like human trafficking in the Lulu stories. I mean, did you not?
Yeah.
Do we notice that there's a story about human trafficking, like and jewel thievery, and it just, there's some really weird stuff going on, and I kind of liked all that.
Yeah. What I'm learning is I have to reread them. I will say we also delayed recording this podcast twice because I had difficulty getting volume 5, which
Right,
is
and that's the
most of
supply
the Lulu
line issue,
stories.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
the supply lines are broken all around the world right now, and there may not be a way to fix them anytime soon.
No.
Yeah.
So it seems like, they reprinted it recently, so everybody go out and get your Rose of Versailles while you can, before it becomes a supply line issue once again.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just like, maybe I should give the Lulu stories a second chance. Definitely like looking, I showed my partner the cover of volume 5, and he's just like, why? Just, like her being super silly, and then Andre and Oscar being all serious, like, we're going to fight somebody.
Uh-huh. And I get that. I mean, and this was, if you remember about this was 10th anniversary stories. So they were definitely meant to be whimsical edition. They were, hey, it's the 10th anniversary, and I'm not going to rehash the story. And that's something I actually really appreciate, is that she's not just rebooting the story over and over and over, the way some, not so much in manga, but a lot in American comics. It's like the 50th anniversary. Let's tell the story of Batman again, because that's never been done. Like, I dislike that strongly. Like, Babylon 5 is getting a reboot. Really? Why? Do something new. Come up with a new idea. What happens 10 years later or 20 years later or something? How about we take the idea and see where it went, rather than what it did already? And I find that very depressing. I find constantly rebooting something just a nod to your, older people's mortality and my age. All, like, I'm Gen X. We're the old people now. So that's why you're getting the reboot of Babylon 5, because everyone's like, oh, that was so great. It really was, except for when it wasn't. And now they could do something new and fix a lot of those, change this and do something new and add different technology and show how things evolved. But no, we're just going to go over and do the same thing again. Let's do that. That sounds much more fun, because you don't want to admit that you're old. You don't want to admit that your youth is done. It's over. And that story was 20 years old. So I find that very annoying. And I'm kind of glad for the 10th anniversary not rehashing things. Also, the 40th anniversary side stories.
I was about to ask about, there are more side stories, more contemporary, that we're getting now. Is that a true statement?
They were for the 40th anniversary of the series, so they were a few years ago, and I bought them when they came out contemporaneously, so I had read them at the time. They are stories of other characters that we hadn't followed. So you have I think a lovely story about, well, actually, I don't want to spoil anything, but we have a story about Oscar's parents. We have a story about Girardel, which is a very surprising story, and of course Rosalie. So those are the characters we follow, and I think they're really great stories. And again, not rebooting anything.
Yeah,
she might look back and she might look forward, but she never reboots the story. The story of Rose of Versailles has not changed.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, in the Lulu stories, I liked seeing Oscar's dad be such a curmudgeonly man, like, all the time.
Well, he's kind of a jerk.
I know, he's super. He came off way more.
Yeah, and they in the anime they soften him a little bit, and when I finally read the manga, and I was like, man, he's a dick.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that he's inflexible and annoying.
Yeah, even when it comes to Oscar, like we haven't brought up gender too much, but we can bring it up naturally now. Like Oscar, I think Oscar is so interesting from a gender perspective because like she's given a male name by her, like, she's assigned female at birth, but then her dad is just like, no, too many daughters. Name this one Oscar,
Yeah.
and we're gonna pretend that she's a boy.
Mhm.
But Oscar is always like, no, I'm a girl. Like, she dresses up as the boy and accepts a male name in Oscar. But she's like, no, I am female. Like,
Mhm.
thank you, everybody, and all these things.
And she's
then
very open about that. She's like, no, I'm a
Yeah.
woman. My name is Oscar, and I am the captain of the guard all at the same time. That is
Yes,
all
all
true.
just keep up with me, everybody. Like, pick up the pace.
Yep.
But then, yeah, like anytime that her dad is in the situation, being the one to push the male part of it, it's like, oh yeah, he's just being a horrible person. Like,
And when he pushes the female part of it, when he tries to marry
Mm,
her off suddenly, and
that's
she's
true.
like,
He's
I
just bad
love
at
that
gender.
scene when she says, "You raise me as a boy. You tell me I must be a man." And then suddenly now you're just good. And she says, and this was to me, this was very plaintive. She says, if I had been a woman, if you had raised me as a woman, would you have just married me off? And he was like, yes. And she's like, really? Like, that's all you saw the daughter's house? And he's like, yeah. And he's just like, there's something wrong with you. Like, that's just bullshit, It's just wrong. And I like that. She said, I do like too that she struggles sometimes. Like with who am I? I
Yeah.
know what I have been asked to be. I know what people see me as, but who am I? And of course that becomes more important to her when she's starting to fall for Andre,
Yeah. Oh,
and like,
Andre.
how do I even be a woman? I who have never been a woman, but she's always been a woman. And that's why I kind of like the fact that in the early chapters, she falls in love with Ferguson first. So she could have this, completely, it will never happen love affair and have to struggle with the idea of falling in love at all.
Yeah.
And I do think that's all very touching,
Yeah.
but she is who she is. And I very much like that. And of course, I love the scene where she's pissed off at her father Girardelli. So she goes in and starts macking on all the women at the ball and kissing them, and all the men around them are like, we can't compare to Oscar. I mean, like, she's so much better than we are.
How can you compete with Oscar, who is everything, all genders, everything, all the time?
Yeah, and just so much cooler,
Yeah.
And I love that she wears her white uniform, and
She is rocking a 70s disco outfit at that point. I'm just gonna throw that out there.
Yeah, it's white with gold.
Yeah.
With those
It has
bell-bottom
flare
pants.
bottoms. I'm like,
Yeah,
girlfriend, you're
exactly.
going to the disco right now.
Yeah, no, she's absolutely she's just killing it that day. And she's turned on the charm, and she's not stopping. But there's also a moment, a very touching, very human moment for her when she and Rosalie are talking, and she says, if I had been a man, I would have just married you. And I think that admission was probably, it came easy in that scene, but probably, if you think about it, was probably a shocking admission, to herself. Like, oh my God, yes, I totally would have. I would have married her, and it
Yeah.
would have been fine. And of course, Rosalie was in love with her. So that's part of why we consider it a Yuri story. There's, I think, just it being not Yuri so much as queer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of queerness in the story, and I think that's worth exploring. And it was very of its time, but it was also ahead of the time, and also very of now, with young people going, okay, just let me identify myself for myself. What am I? Who am I? What group do I identify with? What makes me me?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this story, she's like, what, 16 to 20? She's not
Something like
older
that.
than
Yeah.
the
Not that old.
readers.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I definitely kind of had this discussion, again with my partner, because he's trans. So I was like, what do you like make of Oscar in the context of this queerness? And I mean, I guess there was one moment where Oscar, gets offended that people keep calling her a lesbian because she's like, I'm not a lesbian.
Yeah, I'm breaking out in hives. I grabbed that screen cap too. That's a great one.
Yes. So he's like, Oscar seems a bit like anti LGBTQ stuff. And I was like, well, I think it's not like, I don't think it's a projection of like, oh, lesbians themselves are bad, but more like Oscar is not a lesbian and is offended that everybody keeps,
Well, also because of the whole thing with Jean, I mean, that's that whole thing. Like, obviously she keeps this man woman near her, and so the queen is gay and has this, cross dresser. And I mean, it's meant, I've been saying this a lot. Any word is a slur when it's meant to be dismissive or demeaning. And I was talking about the word weeb. I mean, like, I see people saying, I'm a weeb, and that's fine. If you want to say weeb, I won't say weeb because I think it's just this generation's nasty word for the next generation. Like, we weren't like that at all when we were original fans. We didn't run around the house going, oh my God, I got this thing. Actually, no, that's not true. You did run around the house going, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And I remember seeing you standing in the bookstore going, hyperventilating over whatever. So you're just being a jerk about the next generation, right? And their over enthusiasm and their excitement. But if you go, God, what a bunch of weebs, it's a slur. It's meant to be a nasty phrase. So in her particular case, yes, Oscar knows enough about herself to know that she's not a lesbian, but it's not so much that her sexuality that she's even really speaking of. She's talking about, like, really?
Yeah.
Like, why am I being dragged into this morass of garbage,
Yeah.
Why am I here in this swamp, right?
Yeah.
And I do like that even through the entire thing, except for that one moment with Fersen, she does not dress in a dress.
Yeah, I was actually surprised when she got dressed up in the dress for Fersen. I was like, oh, I did not expect Oscar to ever like present so female. Like, that
and
was
she
definitely
just does that once specifically.
Yeah.
And that's actually that actually brings me to another interesting translation point, because of course in the original Japanese she's referred to as Oscar-sama, and Mari chose to translate it as Lord because of that scene early on where Nanny is like, here's your dress, and here's a dress, and it's like, no, Oscar will never ever be in a dress.
Yeah.
And you must refer to Oscar as Lord Oscar. And that pretty much is as it says, like, that's not how you're going to ever respond to her. You're never going to call her Lady Oscar. And so Lord Oscar is how it's in this book, because Dad said so. And then it becomes part of who she is. And I know, I think it's a fascinating book, and I think Oscar is a fascinating character because she's written so, a word I'm never going to use probably in any other context, purely. She is purely herself. There's no point where it's not a book about sexuality. It's not a book about gender. It's not a book about, it's a book about Oscar.
Yeah.
And so that any exploration of this makes you go back. It's really about how do you see it? And it's remembering that it is for a Margaret magazine, which is, a teen audience, and then going, what is it about this that I like? What am I responding to? And the idea of a woman in uniform and has always been a very sexy idea. And so you have all these young women creating this idea of the girl prince in their heads. That's a completely different girl prince than the Snow White prince. Snow White as a prince of Sapphire. You have this thing where we've recreated it. And then when Utena shows up, she's clearly hearkening back to this idea of being a better boy than the boys around her.
Yeah.
Like Oscar was.
But she's also like destroying the idea of, I mean, not to go too far into Utena,
which is a whole other thing that we could talk about for 3 hours.
It was like, but Una's just like, what if this whole paradigm is wrong, right? Like the prince is wrong. And then just
the thing is, she comes in not thinking that. Right. That's the thing that I like about that story is the concept of princeliness is an ideal there. It's a priori an ideal that she has in her head, and the story is the fairy tale being destroyed.
Yeah.
In front of her, but also by her.
Yeah. Simultaneously, because
Yeah,
so cool.
simultaneously. And that's a whole lot. There's a lot in that story.
Yeah.
There's a lot. And we could just go on about it forever and ever. And of course, then there's the two manga that people aren't familiar with, which is the TV show manga, which is a lot straighter, and also way more deathy. And then there's the movie manga, which I particularly like because the movie manga has other nods to other 20th century creators. So it's literally a story with 5 distinct versions.
Yeah.
There's the TV show anime. There's 4 distinct versions. There's the TV show, the movie, the TV show manga, and the movie manga, and they are different. And then the 5th version is the 20 years anniversary.
Yes, that we just got. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a whole nother thing.
The way to go, Una. Always staying relevant.
Yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. I mean, honestly, it's a very, very good. I hope in the near future to be doing. I'm doing videos now on my channel on YouTube, which is called Yuri Studio. I'm doing videos about the history of Yuri and about various tropes and other things. I'm hoping to do sort of a deep dive specifically on the girl prince one day.
Oh
soon.
yes, I'm totally gonna look into that when that happens. Yeah, because as you said, it's like the story isn't about gender, which is always what is wild to me. Like, yeah, reading it, I was just like, but it's not like Oscar. It's not about that.
It's really not. Although she does have crises, and that makes her so relatable.
She has crises, but it's still like, oh, this is a story, yeah, about the French Revolution.
It really still is a story about the French Revolution, right? And when people say, like, well, what's it about? I'm like, it's about the French Revolution. It's a great historical piece. I mean, I understand why France gave Riyoko Ikeda the a Medal of Honor for this, because it is a grand epic work.
I saw that and I was like, oh dang. Ikeda has been honored by France for this work.
That's France for this work. And of course it's super popular there.
Yeah.
I
know that France really loves manga, and like this has a lot to do with it. So another historical point that has.
When I was in France the first time, I was in Paris the first time, I happened to have accidentally, it turns out, been staying in the geek section of Paris. And there is, in fact, a geek section of Paris. And so one afternoon, my wife and I were walking in and out of all the comic stores, and we went to one of the manga stores, and there was a collection of the anime, a French collection of the Rose of Versailles anime. And I stared at that thing like, I don't speak, because it had French subtitles. And I was like, I don't speak French, and this would be wasted on me, but it was really gorgeous, and I really wanted it. And I was like, I kind of think I might get it, but I didn't get
it. Good willpower there. Good willpower.
Yeah, I was really, my luggage was already full. I didn't think I could get it home.
You were like, I don't think I can squeeze it in this bag.
No, exactly. So yeah, I mean, I hope your listeners will consider reading it. I'm going to say it's not cheap. The books are hardcover. They're very chunky. It is not a cheap volume. If you cannot get it yourself, please do not pirate it. Go to your local library and ask for them to order it, or to interlibrary loan it. But I really think this is the kind of thing that if you are a shoujo fan or a fan of manga at all, this is a classic work and deserves to be on everybody's shelves.
And again, it holds up.
I do think so.
Yeah.
I think I am personally very proud of the work I did. I'm very, very proud of everything that everybody on the team did. I think the translators killed it. I think the designer just did an amazing job. I think our letter, Jeannie Lee in the lettering, she kicked it out of the park, did such an amazing job. And I just really think that this is one of those things when a company says we're doing this masterwork and you're going, okay, and then it comes out and it's better than you could ever have imagined.
Yeah, we did have to wait for a little bit, but it was worth it.
Because Riyoko Ikeda and her estate, her company, Riyoko Ikeda and her company all do approve everything personally.
Oh gosh.
So she cares about
only imagine.
Yeah, she cares about this, and so I'm hoping that I hope that she looked at this and said, yes, this is what it should have looked like.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I hope so too. So I guess the one last major thing I wanted to talk about was the whole story structure, as it being, about the French Revolution and not really having a main character, or the main character shifting over time. Like,
the perspective shifts, yes.
Yeah. And I just think that it's so fascinating because aside from Rosalie, who was supposed to be like the audience stand-in character, but she wasn't super popular, is what the Wikipedia says anyway. So she kind of got like shoved to the side there. But Oscar and Marie Antoinette is like, bookends the series for sure.
Yes.
The middle bits are like Oscar,
yeah.
bookended by Marie Antoinette. And as far as there's no real antagonists in this, I mean, it's like everybody's an antagonist and a protagonist at the same time. So like they're definitely prime antagonists. They are all murdered in the end by other people for crimes of, starving populations. And I'm just like, that is from a storytelling perspective, that is such a hard feat to have pulled off so masterfully, to be like, hey, the bad guy is the main character of the story. And, Marie Antoinette's not like cartoonishly bad. She's not like, ha ha ha, I love murdering the population of France. Like, she's like, no, I love the population of France. And also I like to party, and she's 14 in the beginning. Like, when she becomes queen, she's very young and doesn't know anything.
Right.
So bad things happen.
Learn anything, which is sort of key. I actually had a long talk with my wife about that just last night. Here's what I think about this.
Okay.
The thing about Rose of Versailles is that it is the story of a gigantic epoch, historical moment, a series of 2 decades of this massive world-changing historical moment. And it's too big to see. So when we're learning about this kind of stuff in history, who do you learn about? You learn about like the George Washingtons and the Marquis de Lafayette's. You learn about these big people over there who do big things. And we see generally in school history from the perspective of people at the top of the history.
Right.
But we live our lives at the bottom of the pile or the middle of the pile generally. And so what she does with Rose of Versailles, what Riyoko Ikeda does with Rose of Versailles, is that she personalizes the events by seeing it through the eyes of people who are affected by it, not just people who affect it. So when we learn about how George Washington won this thing and did this thing and lost this thing, we're seeing history from the perspective of a person who is affecting history.
Right.
What this book does is it shows us the perspective of people who are affected by it. Like Andre has zero power in the entire story. He has never given any. There's no hope for him. He will always be a servant.
Yes.
And Rosalie, who is given a pathway forward, but really cannot take the pathway she's offered and ends up being involved in something else and then choosing to have a much more middle class, what we think of as a middle class or lower class life, because that's a pathway that suits her better. And these are more like us. So in the end, while Rosalie might not have been popular at 14, she was a little irritating. She still is the audience, because we're looking at it and going, how would it have affected people? Like, we can see how we know, we have heard and we know, and we might even have experienced what it's like to be in extreme poverty. Most of us live sort of somewhere above extreme poverty, but not in anything beyond that.
Right.
How were people who were going into work and coming home and having bread, soup, and a bit of meat living? How do we communicate that? How do we communicate that this was worse than you actually could imagine? Because it wasn't just the rich and the poor, it was all those bits in the middle. Which is, like I said, it's exactly where we are now. Those bits in the middle are getting pushed down and down and down and down. And we know that because we're living it. We're living where it's harder to get stuff and food prices are rising and our wages are not matching it. And wow, that's the same story.
Yeah.
So what she did is why is Les Miserables still so powerful a story? Because it took this giant epic, this world-changing event, and it gives them the perspective of a single man. And that is why it's powerful. So we watch this story through somebody who has great intent, and she's not always able to do anything. And that's why the moment when she finally says to the French guard, "We're going to stand on the side of the people," is so humongous, because
Yeah.
in any other story she would have gone and protected the queen.
Yeah.
But she doesn't. She stands with the people. And it's so underplayed the moment when the cannons are turned on the people. That's like the moment,
Yeah.
right? It's so underplayed. It's like that morning they turned the cannons on the people, and then like you're like, that's the end of the chapter. I'm like,
Yeah.
holy shit, like, oh my God, like that was really, that's the moment, right? And there was a moment a few years ago where I was reading that scene and I thought, any day now, any day, we're going to see the cannons. It was, during the BLM protests, and that was that moment. I thought, we're seeing in Seattle and Minneapolis the cannons being turned on the people.
Yeah.
Like, it's the same thing.
No.
And it's the same thing. And so I feel like it makes it approachable, and to some extent a lot harder to read when you realize that you're
Yeah.
literally living through the same exact thing right now.
Yeah. I also think that this is a very American perspective, but when I was reading it, like I think part of the problem with America is that even when you're poor, you kind of like align yourself with the rich, right? Like you get duped
Right.
into, we can be the billionaire someday
Oh
if we
yeah,
just like work.
every unemployed American is a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then to start the story aligned like that, and then realize that like, wait, no,
Wait,
you're
no.
just the poor person who has like very little hope in this story, and you can't move up a rank unless you destroy the whole system. I'm like, that is because my partner is like, but we're also the revolutionaries here, and I'm like, but are we? Like modern America is much more, oh, we're top dogs and we always will be, and we're
Oh
like
yeah, it's the
delusional
American
about it.
exceptionalism thing, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, to some extent, it's part of how we were taught, again, about America. We're always taught from the perspective of people who make change, which is why we lionize billionaires. Oh, look, they're so rich, they're so smart,
Yeah.
but it's stupid. That's not how this is, right? So this history is, and I'm not saying that's how we're taught only in America. We're taught everywhere. You're taught about the kings and the queens and the judges, the generals, and those are not, that's only one teeny piece of history. It's so teeny weeny a little piece of history as any given battle or any given decision, or any one president. I mean, 4 years in the history of even our country at this point is so little a time, but our lives are much longer. So let's talk about how it affects people over time. Let's talk about centuries. And as I was writing my book, my editor made a really good point. I kept talking about the 2000s, by which I meant the first decade of the 2000s.
Right.
And he said, change that to the first decade of the 2000s. He says, because in 20 years, I expect people will still be reading your book. And the 2000s will be a bigger period of time at that point, because we think of the 1900s or the 1800s. We don't
Thing. Yeah.
say, we have to say in the first half of the 1800s. He said, so write it like that. And I was like, okay, that's actually a really good point, because history contracts as we get further away from it. Like the further away you look back, the smaller a piece of time you're looking at.
Yeah. So I mean, in the story, they keep talking about the judges of history, and we're reading about something very that happened 200 whatever years in the past, and now we're reading it 50 years from when it was written, or so 40, 50 years.
Yeah, 45.
So like, are we the reader, the judge of history in this case? Like,
or are we too close to this still? Because we're only 200 some odd years away.
Yeah, that's true. That's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of.
In the grand scheme of things, when we talk about we watch a lot of stuff about archaeology and history, and so they talk about the period of time, say, that the Romans were in Britain, which is like about 200, 300 years. And we talk about it like it's like a week.
Yeah.
It's this teeny little piece of time. And then they go, oh, this is like first century, oh, this is second century, and they're very, very casual about it. And it's like, well, that's only because we're almost 2,000 years away from it. And how far back do we look when we talk about like the Middle Ages, or even like you talk about, I don't know, the Industrial Revolution. It's not that long ago.
No.
And we're learning about it like it's some ancient epoch, but it's not. It's like a couple hundred years. And there are people who are alive today who were born in the 1800s still, or not anymore, but now, but like in the early 1900s. I mean, it's so ridiculous. We're talking about like the early 20th century. And it's like, oh, wait, my grandmother's still alive,
Yeah. Like, my grandpa was 95 and only died recently. So he was born in 1925.
Exactly. When my grandmother was 95 when she passed too. And it's like, whatever. It's like she saw so much change. 2 world wars and the internets and all this other stuff. And at one point she said she didn't really understand it. And I said, don't worry about it. I said, because when I'm your age, they're going to be doing the neural network stuff and I want to understand it. Like, that's okay. Like, technology changes. But yeah, so I mean, are we the judges of history? I don't know, because we're going through this exact same thing. We've learned actually nothing, so maybe not.
We've learned nothing. That's what I learned from the Rose of Versailles.
Exactly. We have learned nothing and we should all despair. No, but can we all be Oscar? Is really the story here. So are you on the side, are you on the side of, stop making the world more inclusive and letting more people have opportunity, or are you on the side of the people? Like, that's the same battle.
Yeah.
Are you with one of the gator groups that are like, oh no, I don't want things changing, and you're like, well, wrong side of history 101, there you are.
Yeah. If you oppose too much change, you're definitely
I mean, and nothing personal, but maybe it'll come back, but chances are things are going to change without you, and you have a couple options, and one of them is to stand firm and oppose it and look very noble as you go to the guillotine.
Yeah.
But I actually think that's one of my favorite stories is Marie Antoinette going to the guillotine. That's actually, I think, is a very good story, because you have a completely different perspective of her than you did at any other time in the story.
Yeah. Well, she cuts her hair, so.
No, it's not even that, but she has, despite herself, matured.
Yeah.
Very much despite herself. And she chooses to go to her death as a queen.
Yeah.
Which is, it's kind of a wasted gesture at that point, but from our perspective, it kind of almost looks like a noble choice.
Yeah, no, I definitely liked it. And I liked, that King Louis XVI was also pretty noble about it. He's like, he's still like, I didn't actually commit any crimes, which, like, okay, bro. But he's also like,
cool story, bro.
Cool story. But he's also like, he's like, I don't want like revenge taken on these people. I accept my fate and all these things. And I'm like, like it's very good at being a complicated portrayal of both of them.
And then you go on to after that, there's again like a 2-page spread where we learn that, after all of this, things didn't get better. And this was the crazy part when you start learning about the French Revolution, because they got rid of their nobility and then kept just killing everybody. And then eventually, they didn't even understand what it was they wanted. And of course, Robespierre and so just end up dying the same way by the guillotine. And then they freaking sell themselves to Napoleon. And you're just like gobsmacked. You're like, I'm sorry, you did know what now?
They needed to have like 3 more revolutions or whatever.
It was so breathtakingly amazing when I realized they were like, yeah, all right, we're not gonna have a king, we'll just have an emperor. I'm like, what? What?
But they like
decided that. Oh my god.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a lot more to be learned from that I don't think we've even gotten close. I mean, they're so interesting. So there's a
Yeah.
video I marked on my other computer, of course, but read the letters of Ferguson and Marie. There's a woman named Elizabeth Farr, Farr, who's done a video on YouTube about those. So if you're interested, it's literally Elizabeth Farr, and she has a single video on YouTube about the letters of Ferguson and Marie. And so if you want to know a little bit about that relationship and about those letters, please go look that up. Very, very well researched.
Yeah, well, definitely one of the things I wanted to close out with here is definitely, do you have any suggestions for further reading, listening to learn more about either Rose of Versailles, French history? That would be helpful for reading Rose of Versailles.
French history is not my specialty. I'm sorry, I have no really good books on that. But what I do hope is that people who read Rose of Versailles will also read Claudine, which is another one of Riyoko Ikeda's works, and it is translated. It is out from Seven Seas, and it is one of her books explicitly discussing gender, and the main character is a trans man, Claudine. It's a really, for a book that is written in the early part of the mid part of the 70s, so incredibly nuanced in thought, and I think it's worth reading, even though I'm going to spoil that the ending is not a happy one. But I think even despite that, it's absolutely worth it. And I think a lot of her work is really quite timeless. And honestly, Riyoko Ikeda is still alive, and she's still putting out stuff. She's really an interesting person. So I would actually look into a lot of her work. But don't be afraid of early shoujo. Look at Heart of Thomas, which is out from, I believe it's Drawn Quarterly. I might be wrong on that. Take a look at some of these early Magnificent 49er works and understand why they were so game-changing, and understand where, this is my thought, understand where the tropes you're familiar with come from.
Yeah.
It gives them so much more depth.
Yeah, I will say we did do Claudine on this podcast with Jocelyn.
Excellent.
So that is if you go read Claudine, then there's also a podcast about that already.
You should totally listen to it then. Jocelyn's awesome.
Yes, Jocelyn.
Follow Jocelyn on Twitter.
Yeah.
She talks about really cool stuff, and she often will talk about what she's either working on or just what she's reading. And I keep a running list of things that Jocelyn is reading for my upcoming purchases.
Jocelyn is definitely one of those manga insider people on Twitter where I'm like, I learn very much from following Jocelyn. So,
here's another good suggestion. Manga-splaining is a podcast that I highly recommend. I'm constantly talking about it on Twitter and on Facebook. Manga-splaining is Christopher Butcher, who ran TCAF for so many years, Chip Zdarsky, who is an American comic artist, Deb Aoki, who is a manga journalist, and David Brothers, who works in manga right now with Viz. And it's Christopher, Deb, and David picking manga, and then for a non-manga reader, Chip, and asking what does he like and not like about it. And it's literally explaining manga for people who don't read manga. But it's really cool as a person who is a manga reader to get these four disparate perspectives on even stuff that I like and know, and get their idea of what works and doesn't work narratively and artistically specifically. And so that's really a really great podcast. I highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah, I've definitely listened to some of their episodes. I usually only listen to the ones where I have read it already, which I guess is not really the point of their podcast, but I still do it.
Well, I was going to do that, and then I just started listening to the first one's Akira, the very first thing they did, and I have never read it, and they made me kind of want to. And so that's sort of very interesting to get their perspective of something that they love so much, and here's why they love it. And that makes me interesting, because it makes me interested. Because when I was young, I was a comparative literature major. And that's pretty much all my papers, all my reviews. Everything I write is, here's why I like it, don't like it, and here's why. And that's what I like about their podcast.
Yeah. Final question was just, have you gotten any really touching messages about how, or other memorable responses about finally having Rose of Versailles in English? Have you gotten the sense that people are very hype about it?
Yeah, I've seen a number of people saying things like, "Oh, thank you, Udon, so much for finally bringing this out." And so there's a lot of people who are very happy. I always recommend never reading reviews of the book. It's very funny. I went to Goodreads just out of curiosity to see what the reviews are, and decided to remember never to read reviews on Goodreads. Um,
Were they
because
bad?
no, they don't. You know what? This is not fair. That was not fair of me. The thing is, most people have no idea how to review a book.
Mm,
So they come onto Goodreads or Amazon to complain or talk about the one thing that they want to talk about. This
yeah.
is very pretty, or it's too short, or it's too
Or there was a
expensive.
typo on this page.
Yeah, exactly. And when I wrote my original review on Okazu, I had actually said, if there's a typo, don't tell me.
I
I mean,
don't want to know.
we worked so hard. I spent so many hours. Really, every one of us on this worked so hard to try to make sure there were no typos. Guess what? There's going to be typos. The very first book I ever published, we had 3 proofreaders and 2 editors, and there was a typo in the first chapter because that happens.
Yeah.
Either somebody does it, just their eye glances over it or whatever. Typos are not how you judge a book. But people are saying, "Oh, it's they look really pretty, but the story is really boring." Okay, that's cool. It's a good value. It's not your thing, but it's not really a good review either. So I don't
No.
tend to read a lot of the reviews, but I have seen people on Twitter saying, "Oh my God, thank you so much, Udon, for putting these out at last." And so I have gotten some very nice feedback on that. So that's always pleasant.
Yay. Well, I'm definitely very glad to finally be like, I know who Oscar is.
You finally know Oscar-sama. I mean, especially with Kageki Shoujo out this season.
Yeah.
Now those of you who wonder why she keeps going on about Oscar-sama, Oscar-sama, now you understand.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
We get to know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, everybody, I hope if I didn't read everybody's question with their tag, I believe we did touch on, like, we discussed all the things. So I hope that
Actually,
everybody
there's
is
one thing we
satisfied.
didn't discuss. I'm real gonna
Okay.
quick do it. I hope you don't mind. I wanna
Okay.
talk about Takarazuka really quickly.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Takarazuka is a town in Western Japan, and there is a theater called the Takarazuka Grand Theater. And Takarazuka is a musical revue troupe that is all women. If you are watching or reading Kageki Shoujo, that is what the group in that story is based on, this all female musical revue troupe. And they touch on things in the manga and the anime that actually are kind of well known, like the bullying of senior students on to junior students. Like that's kind of a well known, I don't know, factor in
Yeah.
past years. And I know they've made some changes in the last few years to try to minimize that. But that the story Kageki Shoujo is based very clearly on the Takarazuka School, which is a school for women who want to be in this musical revue troupe. And a lot of the things you see them doing are very, very, very similar. Like even though when they show scenes in the anime and you see the actors, all the women acting like men, that's a thing that you're going to see in Takarazuka.
Yeah.
Takarazuka is where Tezuka grew up. He lived in Takarazuka, and right across the street from the Takarazuka Grand Theater is the Tezuka Museum. He
Mm.
loved Takarazuka, and so when he did Princess Knight, he was basing the idea of Sapphire on these women playing male roles that he grew up with,
Mm.
seeing at Takarazuka. So Takarazuka informs all of Princess Knight, and when Ikeda Sensei wrote Rose of Versailles, she was writing in that same vein. A girl prince character is very masculine, but still a woman. Since the manga of Rose of Versailles came out, Takarazuka has done many versions of Rose of Versailles over and over and over. It's generally one of the most popular series they have. They've done different versions of the story. They've done the Marie Antoinette and Fersen side. They've done
Mm.
Oscar and Andre's side. They've just done the whole story. It's a super popular series. So this is a very timeless thing, and I kind of think you cannot detach Takarazuka from Rose of Versailles completely because
Mm.
The story is informed by and also informs Takarazuka stage productions. And so when you're watching Kageki Shoujo or reading Kageki Shoujo and Sarasa is going on and on about Oscar-sama, please understand that there's a very, very real reason why that is because they are uniquely intertwined in a way that is almost at this point inseparable.
Yeah. Once again, you cannot overstate how influential the Rose of Versailles was.
Yeah, you really kind of can't. And when you watch other Takarazuka shows, particularly from the 70s and 80s, I think you can really see how much they are affected by Rose of Versailles as an iconic benchmark of performance. I mean, you could see, I've watched a lot of Takarazuka shows, and you can kind of see how they've changed over time. And they're still changing. And what the actresses do now as male and female leads are so different from what they did in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, which is so very informed by stories like Rose of Versailles. Yeah.
I will admit that the only Takarazuka thing I've seen was Sailor Moon, like 2 years ago in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, the live action musical. Yeah. Which also is informed by Takarazuka, but it's not itself a Takarazuka show. But there's a lot of things. The fact that they're all women playing all the roles. So you have a female tuxedo mask or women playing the shiteno, that's very much informed by Takarazuka. So, and that's sort of interestingly, Takarazuka has themselves never done Princess Knight, although another group has. So there has been an all-female review of Princess Knight. I have the DVD of that. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a body of understanding of pop culture knowledge that comes down to us through Takarazuka.
Well, now I regret not having bought Rose of Versailles things in Japan because they're still just like everywhere in Japan, just casually walking around.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, there are. There's. I mean, Ikeda Sensei has a line of makeup. There's, she's got her own vineyards.
Yeah. She's just their own little empire now.
Oh, yeah, I mean, and she's a really interesting person. I mean, she was, when she was younger, she was a cabaret singer and used to do live performances and play the piano and some other stuff. So yeah,
I saw that. Yeah, that she's like really into music and stuff. I was like, all right,
yeah,
Ikeda can do anything. That's what I learned.
Yeah, she's absolutely. I would say that she is a Renaissance woman.
Yes.
Although that's the wrong period of time, but we're just going to go with it anyway.
It doesn't matter. I love her.
An Age of Enlightenment woman. There you go.
Yeah.
Get the dates right.
All right. Well, we could talk about Rose of Versailles literally forever, I think. But we're going to accept that we've said enough words about Rose of Versailles now. So everybody, thanks for listening to Shojo and Tell. Comments, questions, constructive criticism, concerns. Need to gush about how much you love Oscar? Email shoujoandtell@gmail.com or leave a comment on the episode's YouTube page.
Excellent.
We're at Shojo and Tell on Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram. Erica, where can people find you and your work on the internet?
Well, you can start with my reviews and the news reports that I do on Okazu. It's OKAZU, okazu.yuricon.com. Our research about Yuri is at yuricon.com on the essays page. You can find me on Twitter at okazuyuri. That's one word, capital O, capital Y. You can find me on my own Discord, which you can find on the links on yuricon.com. We have a Okazu Discord where we chat about primarily food, as far as I could tell. But we do talk about Yuri. We do talk about Shojo. We talk about the Locked Tomb series a lot. We're big Hero and Gideon fans there. And we talk about a lot of different anime and manga and just other media, which is really kind of nice. It's not just an anime manga group. We do talk about books and movies and other things. And those are the places where you can, I think, find me the easiest. I have also a group of Yuricon group on Facebook if you're interested. And generally speaking, it's all news all the way down, but I'm pretty easy to find and talk to on Twitter and anywhere else you happen to run into me.
Yeah, you're very accessible, I would say.
I
from what I can tell. Yeah. Are you excited every time you listen to or you see a new episode from us? Wow, I can't read my own outro anymore. If so, please consider leaving a rating on Apple Podcasts. This will help the show reach more hearts, or at least ears.
Yeah, I think this is something that every group has to say, you know, like on YouTube you hear like, oh, please like us, and
Yeah.
you know, but really folks, your engagement makes a difference. So could you just please, if you enjoyed the podcast, go to that page on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, wherever, put a rating, say that you like it, put a comment. That actually tells the algorithm that this is very popular. So please do that.
Yes, please. We have to feed our algorithmic lords. they need input.
Our AI overlords.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks again for listening, everybody. We'll be back next time for Takane and Hana by Yuki Shiwasu.
Excellent.
Did you want me to not go from one of the most iconic shoujo series of all time to a contemporary age gap romance? Well, too bad. It's more fun this way. Stay tuned until then. Bye.
Excellent.